Janine, hit the alarm. We got a big one.
You got it.
Ecto cooler. I haven't dyed my GI tract bright green with some of this stuff since 1989. Come to think of it, I guess that means this was made in 1989. Just kidding, it's from the 2016 re-release of the drink. So it's actually 3 years old, which is still really disgusting. Today we'll be remembering the show that inspired that drink, a super rad toy line, and captured the imaginations of millions of ghoul-crazy 80s kids, the real Ghostbusters. Taking the core premise of the 1984 smash hit movie and adding a horribly mistreated pet green blob, the real Ghostbusters extended a whole quirky universe based off the original film.
Hey, sorry to be late for the premiere of our own movie.
It did so with some amazing talent, adventurous spirit, and a little twist of controversy. The real Ghostbusters is, of course, now just one entry in a haunted universe of related Ghostbusters properties, including sequel and reboot films, games, comics, toys, even novels. But for kids growing up in the 80s, there's a good chance that the real Ghostbusters was the corner of that universe they spent the most time in. Whether you look back fondly on the whole thing or consider the mid-series changes to the show a mistake, here's everything you didn't know about the real Ghostbusters.
Who you gonna call? Who you gonna call?
The real Ghostbusters ran for 7 seasons from September 13th, 1986 to October 1991. All of the seasons aired on ABC except for the second, which was syndicated. Based, of course, on the 1984 film, The Real Ghostbusters capitalized on the immense popularity of the film with kids, despite the fact that the original film has some pretty raunchy stuff in it. Yeah, they cut out that scene when the movie aired on TV. The show followed the adventures of the 4 Ghostbusters, Peter Venkman, Egon Spengler, Ray Stantz, and Winston Zeddemore, as they bust ghosts around New York.
It's this or nothing.
Egon, baby, I love you. Fire!
While none of the original actors reprised their roles in the cartoon, more on that later, the characters were based on the work of Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson. Their appearances, however, were altered a bit. Venkman looks like a male model, Ray is pretty much a ginger, Winston is clean-shaven, and Egon, of course, sports a blonde rat-tail pompadour. Research as to why this is a little bit fuzzy. One theory that turned up was that it absolved the show from legal action for using the actors' likenesses without permission. Another theory, and the one I think I'd put my money on, is that it was just simply to differentiate the 4 characters, like how they gave each of them different colored jumpsuits. The jumpsuits change, by the way, is neatly explained in the episode Citizen Ghost, where the show is tied directly to the original movie.
This came in just before you went up to fight Gozer. It's your new uniforms.
I suggest you all change as quickly as possible.
Also prominent in the cartoon is Janine, the Ghostbusters' spunky secretary and the object of my cosplay, underappreciated as ever.
Guys! Guys!
The main addition to the group is Slimer, the food-crazy green ghost from the film, who now lives at the firehouse and is repurposed as a mascot. Pet, hapless bullying victim,
Stand back, I'm gonna blast him.
and sometimes hero.
No, Slimer! Don't do it!
If you're wondering, why is the show called The Real Ghostbusters and not just Ghostbusters? Well, there's a story there. It turns out there were 2 Ghostbusters properties developed during the 80s. One, the movie and show we're discussing here today, and another that was produced by Filmation. Filmation produced a live-action show in 1975 called Ghostbusters, with a space between the words, that was a children's live-action sitcom about a team of goofy detectives who investigate paranormal activities. One of the detectives was a gorilla.
You bring it up from the diaphragm, up into the chest cavity, see? And project. Now let me hear it.
Columbia and Filmation came to a legal agreement which allowed Columbia to license the Ghostbusters name for the motion picture, but in what Filmation co-founder Lou Scheimer has referred to as a dumb move, they didn't go after animation rights to the animated spin-off. In 1986, Filmation produced an animated series of their own based on their 1975 live-action show, which premiered 5 days before the real Ghostbusters. So the creators of the movie-based cartoon, concerned that people might get their show confused with Filmation's, slapped "The Real" in the title, and voila! They loopholed their way into using the Ghostbusters name for the animated spin-off, even though it wasn't part of the original settlement agreed upon for the film. To add insult to injury, the real Ghostbusters even took shots at Filmation's Ghostbusters. In the episode titled Ghosts Are Us, the gang is competing with a rival service, and in one scene, Janine answers the phone and fires off.
Ghostbusters? No, ma'am. This is the real Ghostbusters, not Ghosts Are Us.
By season 4 of The Real Ghostbusters, Slimer skyrocketed from underappreciated underdog, or I guess under slime, to titular hero as part of a show rebrand. The show title changed to Slimer and The Real Ghostbusters and featured 1-hour episodes divided into 2 halves. One a more traditional Ghostbusters story, and the other featuring Slimer as the center of a story set in his own little universe with his own friends and enemies. Among them, mad scientists, pizza chefs, and an ice cream truck driver who Slimer happens to be in love with. I mean, it makes sense. I once chased an ice cream truck for like 20 blocks, so I get it. Anyway, in the cartoon theme song department, The Real Ghostbusters had something of an unfair advantage, with one of the most iconic genre theme songs ready to go.
Something strange in the neighborhood. Who you gonna call?
The original recording Ghostbusters theme, written and performed by Ray Parker Jr., was used as the theme music for The Real Ghostbusters. But visually, there were 2 different versions of the theme. One for the early seasons, and one for the Slimer retooling of the show.
Who you gonna call?
Both versions start with the white ghost from the Ghostbusters logo strutting his stuff before getting trapped within his eternal red circle prison, which is actually very scary if you think too hard about it. The first version of the theme features the Ghostbusters getting the call and taking out a whole bunch of ghosts with a little Slimer thrown in for comic relief. The second version emphasizes Slimer, who's being hounded all around town before he's saved by the Ghostbusters. Also, while we're talking theme music, I should mention that Shuki Levy did some composing for the show generally, like he did for just about every single 80s and 90s cartoon. And I'm telling you, a statue needs to be built in this man's honor. Put it in front of my house. I would wake up to that every day. For the first 2 seasons, the animation on The Real Ghostbusters was intense, extremely expressionistic, often grotesque, and also pretty freaky. For kids, this kind of animation was kind of a toss-up. Some loved it, some were traumatized by it, and for some, it was maybe a little bit of both. Generally, though, being traumatized by scary animation is sort of a rite of passage. Whether depending on your age, it was The Real Ghostbusters, Ren and Stimpy very scary, or Courage the Cowardly Dog.
You either grow or go.
In the original animation style of The Real Ghostbusters, the people could be just as grotesque looking as the ghosts. And there was a lot more wanton destruction and presumably some mass death.
5 seconds, the power unit goes terminal.
Did they just nuke New York Harbor? In any case, by the 3rd season, the network had gotten concerned that the show's aesthetic and tone wasn't kid-friendly enough. And in came a controversial revamping of the series. First, the network hired a consulting firm to make recommendations for various changes. And a lot of the recommendations ended up being pretty drastic. One was that the character of Ray Stantz should be gotten rid of entirely, but the writers refused to implement the change. The biggest changes happened to Janine. Her character's voice, appearance, and demeanor all changed from someone with attitude.
You must be Janine Melnitz.
Well, if I must, I must. Though all things considered, I'd rather be Meryl Streep. But then, wouldn't we all?
To someone more accommodating and maternal, which the network felt kids would find more comforting.
This is the old Janine. And this is the new Janine. You'll note it's not just the face that's changed. Her voice has changed as well. Remember how she used to talk with that really annoying Brooklyn accent?
The junior Ghostbusters were also added to the show. 3 kids who would sometimes help the Ghostbusters with their missions. The idea here was to give young viewers a kid's POV within the show to sympathize with. Slimer also lost his rounded butt and got a tail. R.I.P. round butt. I loved that little round butt. The kid-friendly makeover rubbed one sci-fi icon in particular the wrong way. None other than Babylon 5 creator, screenwriter, and comic book legend J. Michael Straczynski, who was the story editor of The Real Ghostbusters for the first few seasons. Soon after the changes came down from on high, Straczynski left the show.
Toward the end of the first season, the first network season, we had the #1 show in Saturday morning. We were getting killer ratings, killer reviews. Everyone loved us. So having the most successful show on the air, it therefore behooved the network to try and fix it.
And while it certainly built its own world separate from its source material, The Real Ghostbusters made lots of fun references to the original movie. For one, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man made repeated appearances.
We released the big guy.
The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? Are you creeps nuts? Don't you remember what he did to this city the last time?
Yeah, and he's all better now, we think.
But the most interesting, weirdest reference of all is Season 1, Episode 10 itself, titled Take 2. In the episode, the Ghostbusters travel to Los Angeles in a private jet to consult on a film that's being made based on their work. And that movie turns out to be the 1984 film we all know and love.
As long as you got the right people to play us.
Here's the cast list. Murray, Aykroyd, and Ramis? What's that, a law firm?
Damn, they don't even mention Hudson. That's cold. So wait, does this episode mean we're living in a fictional world within a cartoon? Never mind, don't answer that. The Real Ghostbusters was a co-production of Deke Entertainment and Columbia Pictures Television. Interestingly enough, the show was registered under Columbia's short-lived syndication unit, Coca-Cola Telecommunications. Because why pass on an opportunity to remind impressionable kids to drink a big old soda? Andy Hayward, the kids' TV producing god, who has already been many times honored in this series, was heavily involved on the Deke side, and the 2 executive producers on the show were Joe Medjuck and Michael C. Gross. Medjuck would go on to co-found the Criterion Collection, so major film nerd points for him, and Gross was one of the producers of the original Ghostbusters film, as well as the designer of the iconic Ghostbusters logo. The directing work was split among Will Manu, Richard Reynes, Stan Phillips, and Masakazu Higuchi. All of them are animation veterans with lots of work over the last several decades, but Reynes is best known among them as a producer on The Simpsons, Futurama, King of the Hill, and Jackie Chan Adventures. And maybe you're saying, hey, Jackie Chan Adventures isn't really as iconic as the other 3, but you know what? I love it, and also my name is Jackie, so that automatically makes the show better. So back off. The Real Ghostbusters has 50 credited writers on IMDb, although that includes Arthur Conan Doyle and Charles Dickens for inspiring episode plots, so maybe we shouldn't count them. I don't know, or maybe we should. While the writers of the original Ghostbusters movie, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, took a hands-off approach, there were still plenty of standouts among the writing staff. David Gerrold wrote 2 episodes. He was a writer on the original Star Trek, and most importantly, wrote one of the great entries in the category of So Bad It's Amazing, the episode Trouble with Tribbles, a classic.
They seem to be gorged.
Gorged? On my brain? Kirk, I am going to hold you responsible.
Keith Giffen wrote 1 episode. He's known for his iconic run on DC's Legion of Superheroes, as well as being the creator of Rocket Raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy. So maybe him and Bradley Cooper hang out. I don't know, it feels possible. In addition to working as a talent coordinator and recording assistant on the show, Mark McCorkle wrote 1 episode and would go on to create Kim Possible.
So what's the sitch? If you wanna reach me.
See, you gotta start somewhere. One of the most impressive stories from the writing staff is Linda Wolverton's. She wrote 1 episode and later made the jump from animated cartoon writing to Disney feature films. She wrote the screenplays for Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and more recently, Maleficent. And then there's William Rotsler, one of the more multi-talented personalities we've encountered in our Everything You Didn't Know journeys. Rotsler wore a lot of hats in his interesting life. He was a pornographic film writer, director, and actor. a fiction writer, an artist and illustrator, and the winner of 4 Hugo Awards for his sci-fi zines. Apparently, he found a little time also to write kids' cartoons. Then, of course, there's J. Michael Straczynski, who we mentioned before was a story editor as well as a writer. Straczynski also helps explain the fact that a number of writers from the real Ghostbusters went on to write for Babylon 5. They were already friends and collaborators with the creator. That's Hollywood for you, babe. Then there's the cast. As we said, none of the original movie Ghostbusters reprised their roles for the cartoons. But that comes with one really brutal caveat. Ernie Hudson did want to play Winston Zeddemore, and the producers didn't pick him. According to Hudson, they even told him he was going to be given the part and that doing a reading for the producers was just a formality. That is f***ed up. That is awful. Wow. We love you, Ernie. We love you. Oh, man. Frank Welker voiced Ray Stantz and Slimer. He's a voice acting veteran known for voicing Fred Jones in Scooby-Doo and the actual voice of Scooby since 2002.
You want a Scooby snack? No thanks. I'm watching my figure.
He's also voiced several Decepticons in the original Transformers series, including Megatron.
More than you imagine, Optimus Prime.
Maurice LaMarche voiced Egon Spengler. LaMarche is another voice acting veteran who's done work for The Simpsons, Futurama, and dearest to my heart, was the voice of Brain in Pinky and the Brain.
Gee, mate, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Peter Venkman and Winston Zeddemore were each voiced by 2 different actors for different halves of the series. Lorenzo Music voiced Peter Venkman for the first half of the series. In addition to being an actor and, of course, the voice of Garfield,
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
he was a writer for Bob Newhart and Mary Tyler Moore. The role was taken over by Dave Coulier, who's best known as Joey Gladstone on Full House, or, if you're a woman of a certain age, the person that Alanis Morissette wrote You Ought to Know About. In the case of Winston, Ernie Hudson was passed over in the audition for Arsenio Hall. This was Arsenio's first major role. His live-action breakout came a year after he had left Ghostbusters in Coming to America, and of course he became a famous talk show host after that. You remember, Arsenio was replaced by Buster Jones, an actor whose other cartoon genre work includes roles on Super Friends, Transformers, and G.I. Joe. Laura Summer voiced Janine for the first half of the series. Aside from being a voice actor, she has many IMDb credits as an ADR voice recorder on such major live-action movies as Shallow Hal and The Butterfly Effect. Kath Soucie took over the Janine role. You've also heard her voice in Rugrats, Dexter's Laboratory, Clone Wars, and more. Roger Bumpus voiced Louis Tully. He's been immortalized as the voice of Squidward Tentacles on SpongeBob. As compared to some of the other shows we've looked at, The Real Ghostbusters is a little light on icons buried in these smaller parts. But there are still a few. Walter Koenig, Chekhov on the original Star Trek, voiced a one-off character. Brad Garrett, aka Robert Barone on Everybody Loves Raymond, provided additional deep and gravelly voices. And cutest of all, Dan Aykroyd did an uncredited turn as a movie studio boss in one episode.
This is really fantastic. It looks just like the real thing.
That's why we wanted you here to advise us, make sure we're doing it right. After all, this is your life story.
Like with so many of its fellow cartoons, the world of The Real Ghostbusters extended off the TV screen and into the sweet, profitable world of merchandise. Most notably, toys. Yeah, okay, very good. So Kenner produced 10 waves of action figures based on the show. 10 waves.
Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Let's show this pile of dessert who's boss. Activate Neutrona Blaster. We ain't afraid of no ghosts.
One wave were the fright features. Ugh, he's scared, so his hair goes higher and his ears pop out and his eyes get bigger. Honestly, this is very fun. Then we had the Super Fright Features line. Oh, his head turns around. We've also got the Firehouse. There should have been a pole where this mohawked Frankenstein is standing, but the pole's gone. It also didn't matter because they didn't really slide down the pole, you just sort of threw them. You just kind of went, and that's what the pole did. So it's fine that the pole's not there. You might remember, because this was a very popular toy, the Haunted Granny. Looks like a normal granny, right? Uh-oh. Her mouth opens and you see all of her guts and you see her teeth.
It's Granny Gross! I hear ya! Run! Ah!
This is the kind of grandmother I aspire to be. So she's pretty sweet. Also, a fun detail, she's depicted here in the firehouse. Speaking of the firehouse, you know we put our boy Slimer on top. There were so many cool Slimer toys. This one, he would shoot something out of his mouth. We don't have the stuff that he would necessarily shoot. We have our slimed heroes who actually came with slime. In fact, the Ghostbusters kind of helped start the slime trend that we then saw with He-Man and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And we've got some ectoplasm right here. It says on the back that it is from 1986, and it smells really bad. If I had to guess, there's food in there? That's actually disgusting. So thank you, Ghostbusters, for introducing children to slime. One of the last things we'll demonstrate, we got this guy. Ay, ay, ay! It looks like a giant praying mantis comes out. Close her back up. Okay, we could do this all day, but we have got to get back to the original video. Let's go. I'm getting pretty good at that. There were also 2 comic book series based on the cartoon, one produced by Now Comics and the other by Marvel UK. The Now Comics series is notable for being the home for the adaptation of the story from the Ghostbusters 2 movie. That plot was adapted into a 3-issue arc told with the real Ghostbusters versions of the characters. There was also a follow-up cartoon series called Extreme Ghostbusters, about a younger generation of Ghostbusters being mentored by an older Egon. It's a bit of a polarizing show, but I, for one, honestly think it was pretty good. All right, controversial, I know. The real Ghostbusters was an important after-school friend to many of us, one that was always trying to make us laugh.
Ray, there are some things more important than TV.
Name 2.
That's not fair.
And that's what's great about everything in the Ghostbusters canon, the silliness, not taking things too seriously.
Guess I'm just a force for good in our times.
Yeah, Peter.
What else are you thinking about the real Ghostbusters? Did we miss anything? I mean, we could do a whole video about Slimer and how underappreciated he was in the first half, but you let us know what you think in the comments below.